Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial I will show you how you can make use of the new Procreate 5.2 which allow you to draw on 3D objects from Nomad Sculpt all on the iPad without the need for you to move into a 3D software or out of your iPad. Now the way to do so is through an application or a software that allow you to do UV mapping. So the first concept I would like to introduce here is the idea of UV mapping, especially if you are new to 3D. So what is UV map? A UV map is a map that contains information, usually visual information, regarding how a surface of an object look like. And an example of this, we use maps every day and we are used to use this map in 2D. This is the same concept of UV map. So an Earth here is a 3D object with X, Y, and Z. In order to allow us to find our locations and orient ourselves, we unwrap it. So it's like we're taking the textures of the outside and then we are unfolding it and then we are ironing it, so we end up with a map that looks 2D, and this map reflects the 3D object surface. Now why we use the word U or the letters UV? This is just to differentiate it from X and Y. So X, Y, and Z becomes UV, and as a Z value we don't have that anymore. There is something later on you will be introduced to if you continue your learning journey, which is a height map. A height map allow you to introduce a Z value again. So the problem we have is that Nomad Sculpt does not allow a UV map. So if you've tried to export from Nomad Sculpt directly to Procreate, you have probably faced an error. And we, luckily enough, have Forger app. And this is Forger Classic. There is 2 versions, if I am correct. And those versions allow you to do a small unwrap. Now keep in mind there is limitation, so it is not as good as well-established app or manually unwrapped processes that could happen in Blender, in ZBrush, or in any other 3D software like Cinema 4D, Maya, or 3D Studio Max. So to keep this in mind, what we would need is to allow an object to have a UV map. This UV map, we will be using it in Procreate, and to do so, we will follow this workflow. Start your 3D model in Nomad Sculpt, export it into Forger to allow a UV map to be generated, and then export it again to Procreate and do all your painting and drawing. This would be useful for anyone who is beginner, and also it would be useful for anyone who would like to make the best use of their iPad on the go. So without further ado, let me close this Safari and move into Nomad Sculpt. And in Nomad Sculpt here, I have this sphere. This is not a Nomad Sculpt tutorial, but I will go through some of these tools and I'll throw an idea for you. You probably could make use of it. So if you are into NFTs, you could do a 3D model here, a 3D sculpt, and then keep changing the paints in Procreate. So keep this in mind. So I have here my object. I have the grid on, which usually I don't use. What I'll do first to make this a little bit prettier on the screen is change the environment background to be back into the actual environment, and that's happening from this picture here. Then I will click into shading, because usually when I am paying attention to the actual mesh, I like to change it from PBR into a matte cap, and this matte cap, which looks like clay or a human skin, is the one I like to go to. So we have the gizmo, we have the sphere. What I'll do is squeeze it a little bit And then what I would need to do is to give it a little bit of a shape. Let's do something like a heart. It doesn't have to be an exact heart, but something like it. So I'm using my move tool with the symmetry on. So here's my symmetry. Again, this is not a Nomad Sculpt tutorial, so I have plenty of these on my channel. Make sure to check them if you want to learn more about sculpting. Also, there are plenty of good channels like Southern FX and I forgot some other. I'll be mentioning them probably in different video. So I just want to create a very simple shape. Also, I'm paying a little bit attention to the geometry, and now I am creating something like a heart. Something I can do is take the multi-resolution down, and this multi-resolution would be good for my smoothing. I will click on smooth, make the brush a little bit bigger, and smooth this object as you are seeing here. Probably a heart would have something like a dent in here, and I can somehow scale these up. This looks good enough for me now. I can crack it all up to have the multi-resolution. One thing I would like to use is also a stamp on my same object. If I go to painting, next to it there is an alpha, and I have a few alphas here. I think I have shared some of these with you. I will be using the I one, and if I have the I one here, that would be interesting to have on my object. I just want my intensity to be a little bit lower, and let's add an eye for an eye here and there. So this would be the first eyes I'm adding, and then let's add a mouth. Again, going to the stroke, finding a mouth, turning off the symmetry, and adding a mouth here. This looks a little bit too much, honestly, for me. So let's do this again with somehow a smaller intensity. I'll start with the mouth. This looks fine for now. And I will go again, change it to an eye, back to symmetry, and we have now a heart with an eye. I will turn off wire, and I'll give you also a tip. When you're working with a mesh and try to understand how the different components work and how clean your mesh is, go to the cog here and disabled. So disable smooth shading. Yeah, smooth shading would cover the actual geometry and make it smooth. I don't want that. I want to see the geometry as rough as possible. And now I'm using my smooth brush to smooth it manually, so I don't need a smooth shading to show up. So again, smooth shading from here, smooth shading from there. Again, this is only to show you how we can use this application. So this heart, weird heart, is now ready to be taken into Procreate. Again, I've mentioned there is limitation. So if you have a very big object or many components, what you need to do is to remesh them all into one. So this is very important. The first step and tip is that you only need one object. So if you have multiple objects, the actual UV mapping would be very complex and you won't be able to deal with it. So if I want to add, for example, a sphere into the heart here, so let's just add a sphere into the heart somewhere in here, or let's make it smaller and put it in the eye, if that makes sense. What I would need to do is to actually remesh and make sure that I only have one geometry. So I have an eye here. I'll click on mirror, I'll validate it, and what I would need to do is to combine these together. So in here with voxel remeshing somewhere around 400, 300, let's try, click OK, and voxel remesh. Okay, it's fine. I haven't lost much of my details. I can smooth that back again. So it needs to be one mesh, and this is some of the limitation you would have. It would work perfectly with one object, but if you have more than one object, you need to keep an eye on that. So I have my weird heart almost ready. One thing I always like to do is just check the wire mesh. It looks fine, it looks detailed enough, it's not too much, so I can export it. To export, you can go to File, go all the way down here, click on Object, and export OBJ. I'll do something now. I exported directly to Procreate and it's importing. However, this is the error that you will be seeing. Cannot import at artwork. This is coming back to what I was saying before. You need to use an app to generate your UV map. So let's come back again to this panel, click on Export, and in here I would look for Forger app. Now Forger app is a really good app. I've meddled with it for so long. However, I did not use it as much as Nomad Sculpt. At that time, Nomad Sculpt interface was more clean. Now they have polished it and they are releasing a new version. Import, I'll click on sculpting and you would have your sculpt in here. Now a little bit of interface explanation. All of your tools will be here. All of your meshes in the object will be here, and this specific selected mesh will be here. So what I would need to do now, the first thing I might do is to click on transition and go back to scale and then scale it up, move it a little bit above the grid. That's the second thing. And the most important bit, which I would like you to pay attention to, is how to create the UV map. There's an option here where you could actually look into the mesh, allowing symmetry, allowing different options. Let me see if I go here and try to look for the wireframe mode. It would be under display setting. Click on wireframe and now you can see your wireframe and you can see how complex it is. My object is selected, and if I click on the object panel in here, I can find that there are some options. If I click on this 3 dot, you can see that you can generate automatic UVs, and that's what we will be using. But also one thing I like is that you have an auto retopo. So it's a retopology, meaning revoxeling these different square. And if we use this first, it would give you a number. I don't want it to be that high. Let's put this something around 2000. You could make it bigger, you could make it smaller. You could also force symmetry if you want to by clicking here, so your object retopology is symmetrical. I leave it now as here and click on Retopologize. It would ask you to save. Because of this tutorial, I would not save, and you will wait a few minutes, count down from 10 till 1. And if that didn't work, then it's time to make yourself a cup of coffee. And if that didn't work, you need to check my Discord. So my Discord is really good. I'm launching this NFT project and it would be good to have you there. The auto retopo was successful. What would you like to do with the old mesh? I don't want the old mesh, so just delete it. And now we have a new retopologized object. You might find, again, getting back to the limitation, that you have introduced a new details that they were not there before. You can play with these different settings until you are happy with your map. In this case, what I will do is I'll just leave it as it is. I could actually click on smooth here and try to smooth some of the errors in my geometry. Again, this is not a Forger app tutorial, but a way to demonstrate how you could actually take this into Procreate. Once that is done and you're happy with it, I can simply go to click on these 3 different dots and then generate automatic UVs. Once that is done, I can now export it to Procreate. So click on export and then click on a 3D model, and I'll give this a small name here. So let me see if I can name it heart, and I'll export it into a file. And the reason to have it into a file, well, actually I don't need to have it into a file. Let's take it directly into Procreate. So let's look for Procreate app in here, and here is your Procreate app. So it is importing, again, countdown from 10 till 0. Hopefully it will be done so soon. And now you have your weird object. It's not identical to what I was thinking of. It's not good, but it's not bad. So let's start with this weird object. So what can we do with this? So the first thing I would also to introduce now in Procreate, if you haven't used Procreate before, is that you have layers. And because this is a 3D object, these layers also comes as color, which allow the color to show. Roughness and metallic is simple when you are drawing with roughness and metallic in Nomad Sculpt. So let me give this a little bit of less roughness. So as you can see, I have selected the layer of the object. On the base layer, clicked on this small cube, and you have the roughness in here. I can drag that color, and now you can see a little bit of shyness has been introduced to the object because we are not having it as rough anymore. So this is good. Now what about metallic? So metallic works in the opposite. So roughness, when it's totally white, it's totally rough. When it's black, it's less rough. That's why we have these. Metallic, when it's black, then there's no metallic. But when it is a little bit of gray, then metallic has been introduced. You can also draw that manually. But for now, I'll just drop this, and now you can see how metallic this looks like. Again, the mesh is not ideal. I need to spend more time on it, but it's one way to go. If you're not so happy, you can undo. Let's make this a little bit darker, so I don't want this to look like a metal object. Now we have this in place. You could start adding layer, and remember these layers can be assigned a color, roughness, and metallic. So if you are a big fan of Procreate, then probably know that you have all these trusty tools. So for example, I have this ink illustration, and I can do this on black, and you can see now I am just painting to highlight certain object. Again, this is not a Procreate tutorial, but to show you how you could actually use Procreate to create some or paint some of your 3D objects. And now you can see that is working perfectly for me. Let's try to work with other brushes. So this brush is from Nebenzoo. You need to check him out, by the way. He's a very cool guy, and I've worked with him on the Drops project. So Nebenzoo has given me these, which is fabric. Let's try to give this a little bit of a red. I am on that new layer, so it's not the same layer. And I'm just adding a little bit of fabric material to my object. Again, this is a color material, so as you can see, it is not impacting my actual metalness or roughness of the object. Again, you could somehow be as creative as you want, and I'm sure some of you are way more advanced in using Procreate than me. So let's just move on with demonstrating what else you can do. Now I have these. I would like, for example, to have a little bit of color somewhere here in the eyes, and again you could see how that is working. Well, one thing you might want to consider, which is something I haven't worked out, is how symmetry could be somehow forced in Procreate in 3D. If you figured this out, please leave me a comment in the chat underneath this video. So I have this eye, I want this to be black, and then I would have another eye here. Well, from now on it becomes more of a painting tutorial, which is not something of my strength, but I'm taking you through all these steps for you, and also it's a relaxing process for me after talking so much for 20 minutes now. Now, what else you could do with that? Well, there are plenty of cool things that you could do. So I have now this weird heart. Imagine the possibility of what you could do. And getting back to the idea of you want to have the same mesh with different drawing on it. You can have splashes. Let me add a little bit of green splashes somewhere here. Well, these are not showing. Well, they are showing, but this becomes like a dirt. Anyhow, what other objects we can do with this quintillion? Let's add a new layer. And in here you can import an image. So let's say we go to this tool in here, spanner, and then let's go to add and let's insert a photo. And in here I would like to insert this photo, which is for Pablo Picasso. What's nice about this is that I can make it a little bit bigger. Now when I am making it bigger, you would notice that it is not wrapping as you would like it to. And the reason here is because you need to change the projection. So what I'll do is I change the projection depth, and now you can see when I've changed it, it's somehow covered all what I can see. Also, if I change the bi-directional, it will extend it beyond, and now I have it all covered. Remember, this image I have is big, and big respect and love to Pablo. Now I have this in place, I've changed the projection, I'm happy with it. Well, you're done. Let's change the type of this layer from being normal to being screen, to being add, to just an overlay or just a soft light. And then I can go back here and change some of the colors I have added for this red color. So I can go back here and again go to one of my trusty brushes, change the color to be something like an orange. Let's introduce a yellow here. I mean, yellow is not my favorite color, but let's introduce it. So you could actually go back, change some of the colors of the objects you've already created, and that would allow you to draw on your objects. Now when you're happy with that, it's time also to give it a little bit of lighting, and that can be done in Procreate. So how can I do this, you might ask, and I'm here to help you. So let me just draw this bit, and now we have this object in place. It has the roughness and metallic as I would like it to. You could of course spend more time working on it. Now if you go to this panel tool here again and click on 3D, you would have show 2D texture, and this would allow you to work directly on your texture. So I can go here and change the color this to be blue and color some items that I would like them to be blue. Let me add a little bit of detail for the mouth by using this tool, and now we have a mouse in place. Yeah, that's cool. That's pretty cool. Now what else we can do? What we can do here is that we can take off the object from being 2D textures into view in AR, and that would allow you to use your camera and project that object. I can't do that now because my iPad is on the table, as you probably see. Something else I would like to talk about is how could you actually play with the lighting. So there are objects here. Remember, I've clicked here on select, and it selected the object and ruined it for me, and I don't want that. You could use the adjustments tool similar to what you would do. By the way, cool trick, if you go for example to this layer, and if you go to blur and then blur it, you could actually see the seam. Yeah, that's one way to check how your seams work in your object. Now let's go to share here where you can export it. Let's go to 3D again. Underneath paint through mesh, you have edit, lighting, and environment. And I love this interface. You can see that this is the light, and you can change the light intensity. So if I change the light intensity, I can also drag it. So I want this light, for example, to be somewhere in the back to give this impact of like a rim light, you see? You can also again change the intensity. So once I made the intensity a little bit lower, I can change it back to be a different color with a different saturation. So let me change this to pink and make it a little bit intense. And now I have my heart with a rimmed pink light, similar to the light I have here in my studio. I can change this again to be somewhere else. I can add a new light. So for example, if you want to create a studio 3 light, I will make this blue. I will change the intensity to high. You can see the impact on back, but for me the most important bit is the actual possibility of creating a rim light, which can be somewhere here, and put it a little bit up. So now I have these in place. Also, you can change the environment, so you can remove the environment. You can change the environment exposure. You have the studio, you have an auditorium, you have a city, you have a nightlife. Let's click on the auditorium. I like this actually. You have a daytime, you have a beach. You can experiment with these. Let's again click on here, click on done, click on done again, and now we have our object, our mesh, our heart. And as you can see, moving it would keep the light, and that would allow the light to interact with my model. Once you're happy with that, you can simply click on your spanner, click on share, and then share image, and that's it. You have saved your image and it is ready to go. Here again, you can share a model through the Procreate format, the USDZ, and the OBJ. If you share it as a OBJ, it would come as a folder, so you would need to open it again in your favorite software on computer. So that would be it for this episode. I have literally put my heart out and showed you how you can take a small mesh from Nomad Sculpt to Procreate 5.2 through the use of Forger app. Keep in mind, this will still have some limitation, and those limitation is regarding to how complex is your mesh. And the most important bit is that you need your mesh to be one object, not several objects, and you need to retopologize it in Forger before actually taking it to Procreate. I hope you've learned something or two. Until we meet in a different tutorial. Bye now.